We are officially live. Okay. Hello, my beautiful colleagues and friends. It's Izabela here, and I have a very special guest that I'm super excited to share today's not only topic, but what will be, but who is here with me in the studio. I have a chance to speak with Louise in a very interesting setting, which we will depict in a moment. And she's joining us at the moment from the South Africa. Usually she's in UK, and COVID made a lot of interesting dynamics, didn't it, Louise? She's a thought leader. She's a phenomenal coach and entrepreneur. She's also helping in C-suite with executives, and she is expert on conscious leadership. Isn't that amazing? And also business cultures and innovation. So without further ado, let's give a chance to hear from Louise. Louise, how are you?
Hi, Izabela, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation together about such an interesting topic. I think it's, it's a big, broad topic and so interconnected, and I'm so looking forward to this, so thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And of course, I wanted to have a chance for our audience to hear a little bit about your background. I mean, you'd accomplished so much as being as not only a thought leader and focusing so much of continuous improvement and growth and being agile in all that as a managing director of Mowbray by Design, as well as faculty of one of the associations that I'm really glad to learn more about a Center of Creative Leadership. You did so many additional things, and do you mind just sharing a little bit about your background?
I always laugh when I think about this because it's how long have you got and how many chapters do you want? It's interesting. I grew up in South Africa. I was born in Cape Town to British parents and moved to London in my early 20s. And got into the investment banking sector and then technology and then executive search. And I think it was in executive search really that I found my golden thread, which was all about people. For the first time, I'd been looking for it, but I hadn't quite figured out what it was. And then I founded an executive search at the rise of .com and new economies, working with the venture capital community. Very exciting times, my first entrepreneurial anything. And of course, you know, with the sort of fever pitch excitement of being involved in that sector at that time, of course, the massive disappointment of the markets crashing and my first business a failure, I guess, if you want to call it that, but massive learning experience.
Learning practice.
Exactly, massive practice, massive learning opportunities. And I'm very grateful for that first opportunity. And I then lived in the Middle East for about 3.5 years. I was based in Dubai and was managing director for a British luxury lifestyle company, which I set up across the region. And went back to London in 2005 with one thought, which is, I'm only going to do what I'm deeply passionate about. And then, of course, it was followed with the question, what the hell is that? What does that look like? So I knew it was the golden thread was people. It was working with leaders and teams and organizations to help them develop and grow. And my personal growth journey, I guess my business has reflected my own personal growth journey over the last 15 years. I guess probably the biggest thing, the thing that really made most sense to me was when I retrained as a coach, an ICF qualification, and I did it through Conscious Leadership, which was absolutely amazing. I knew I was looking for something that not only developed my capabilities in terms of coaching and working with teams and organizations and leaders, but very much something that developed me as a human being. And it needed to be that big. And I found it, which was amazing. And then in 2012, I found myself in Boston at the 4th Annual Conscious Capitalism Conference.
Wow.
And that was just brilliant. I mean, it was the first thing that really made sense to me in business, because I could really feel that things, you know, with the pace of technology and the increase in complexity, things were changing so rapidly. And I knew it would get faster and faster, but there just didn't seem to be a model that that worked for our world of work today and moving into the future. And the last 10 years have just been a gift that keeps on giving. So, yeah, very much all things conscious leadership. And there've been a lot of other things that have come along too. I've trained in Futures simply because I guess it's how my brain works, my mind works. It was such a relief, actually, when I discovered it, because I finally found something which matches the way I think, which is just wonderful. But more importantly, it helps me to give my clients a much broader systemic lens on the world of work today and into the future. And I think that's really what it's all about, perhaps not being terribly attached to what is and being able to think in multiple futures, and developing that sort of mindset. And then, of course, all sorts of things. I mean, almost every year there's a different flavor or theme to leadership. Last year, I was very much talking about resilience because, of course, we were sitting in the middle of a pandemic. And this year, for me, it's been about courageous leadership. And interestingly enough, when we talk about what leadership needs to look like in the future, who do we need to be as leaders at all levels? For me, it's very much about navigating our world through the lens of ethics. I think this is going to be the most challenging thing we could possibly do, the thing that will have us second guessing ourselves all day, every day, as tech and science moves on. So, yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow, such a rich share and such a rich experience. So I'm glad you mentioned early growth and failures as a great opportunity to springboard to not only self-discover, right, but also to self-actualize. And seems like that helped you tremendously. And do you mind just sharing a little bit how that impacts you on choices and decisions? And I also love when you said second chapter, because you lived obviously internationally. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your Dubai experience, as we're having some of Middle Eastern colleagues here joining us and commenting where they're coming from. But also, I'm sure the audience would love to hear that as well. So please, do you mind thinking a little bit about that before we go into all that leadership combination of success potion as everybody's trying to figure it out. What do we need more on? How can we utilize and how can we develop and all that not?
Yeah, the Middle East was a life-changing experience. I think living in any other, never mind country, but region, is always a life-changing experience. And, for me, growing up in Africa and then living in London and a couple of other places in Europe, and then and lots of international travel over the years. Living and working in the Middle East was amazing. It was quite extraordinary. I think it brought back so many memories of Africa from a tribal perspective, which may sound a little bizarre because they're very different. But at the core, at the fundamentals, there is a strong connection to kin, to family, to relationships, to people and systems. And I was there, happened to be there during 9/11. And it gave me a very different perspective on the world. It's something that really altered my view. Not that I've ever been very fixed in my view. I've always, if I think of my friends, they're a little like the United Nations. There's somebody from everywhere. And I really enjoy that. I love the diverse perspectives, and I guess I'm just deeply curious about how things work. I think one of the things that I've really discovered over time is there's really not a lot that's different about us.
Yeah.
Perhaps on the surface of things, or perhaps how we might have grown up, or the systems that we grew up in. Sure, that can be very different on the surface, but we're very, very similar, and we're all the same, and we're all interconnected. I think that's the most important part of it. So yeah, I love the Middle East, and I made loads of friends from all across the region and beyond. I think when you're based in Dubai, and of course, it's a bit of a hub for people from everywhere. So yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I'm so glad that I spent the time that I did there. I took a lot away.
That is fantastic, and thank you for sharing reason again. Because I'm glad to hear that you had a different lens and understanding, specifically during some of the interesting dynamics that happen across the board, across the world. I'm sorry, during that time. But we're having here Hamad, Ronald, Arthur. And we're also having Yasir joining. So we're having also North Africa. We're having people from Florida, so it's just very nice, and it's just so nice to see people also join us from Middle East. So wonderful. But I love what you mentioned, that you would recognize something from your roots from South Africa, but also in the Middle East, how much it is about people, right? And one of the things when I am asked about leadership and different types of leaders and all these great conversations, right? Always for forefront is people, isn't it? So do you mind sharing how did you get into so passionate about leadership yourself, and a little bit about your path that you got into conscious types of leadership, and then obviously ethical and everything else?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, the realization that people were, everything for me was people, and the fascination with how we work and how we live and how we love and how we play, all of that stuff really connected for me during my years of headhunting. And I think that the bug on leadership, the bug that I caught on leadership development was seeing, literally working with thousands of people over the course of time and experiencing how amazingly hard people try to be their authentic selves. And, people who are well equipped, I mean, they've done the right degrees at the right schools, and they've, or perhaps not, and they've done everything they can to sort of shift things in their trajectory. But too often we aim for the wrong stuff. We aim for the label on the door, the big shiny brass label on the door, and the job title and the salary. And I think there's certain, a number of iterations of that we can do, especially early in our careers when we're just trying to gather experience and, perhaps earn a bit more money and travel a bit more and all of the other things. But eventually we get to a point, and I saw it time and time again, where we get into our perhaps late 30s and early 40s, and we just think, how many times do I have to keep doing this?
Yeah.
In a job that I'm not madly in love with, but it's what I'm qualified to do. And I now have all of these responsibilities like homes and children and school fees to plan for and all of life stuff. And how the hell do I get out of this? And how do I find what I actually really am passionate about doing? So, we make all of sometimes the wrong decisions for the very right reasons. So, and I was very much like that myself. I kept trying different things and working harder at it, or applying myself more, or studying more, or, whatever the thing was, thinking this is the elixir. I finally got there. This will be the thing that kind of delivers this feeling I'm supposed to have. And it just didn't, until I found that golden thread. And I think that, one just has to keep on looking. And I also realized that there were so many people who just needed a little something. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I definitely wasn't trained in any of this stuff. It was just purely through observation. They just needed a little bit of something. And it was a different way of thinking about the world, about themselves. They had everything else going for them. We've all got everything that we need, fundamentally. So those years of headhunting were really instrumental in developing that thinking and developing that understanding. And actually, when I first started Mowbray by Design, I initially started with specializing in personal brand. And I think I was a very, very much an early adopter. In 2005, Facebook only started in 2004. But I just had this real deep understanding of where things were going in terms of social and digital media and how it was going to change the face of leadership. And one thing I didn't touch was branding, as in PR or marketing, but very much working with top-end leadership executives to line up the internal with the external, the being with the doing. And
yes,
yeah,
huge shift versus doing and then being and having and then being on the end. Yeah.
massive difference, right?
Yeah.
So that was really the core of it. And that was very much a conscious program, even though I wasn't trained in it, I hadn't realized it, because it was very much working with authenticity and honesty and, lining up what's inside and outside and ensuring that any messaging works very much in alignment and is authentic. It's really and congruent and consistent. So, pinching some certainly some theories and some practices from marketing and applying it to the human condition, to who we are. And that was really triggered by the years in headhunting as well, because some people would walk into a room and they just had this extraordinary presence. They'd light up a room and you just wanted more of that person. You want to hear more from them. You want to learn more from them. You want to follow them. I mean, that's what leadership is, isn't it? It's why we follow people. So, so it was really 5 years of working in that realm, and I guess honing my capabilities and starting to lecture for some business schools and speaking professionally and things like that before I came across conscious leadership and consciousness coaching. And that's really that triggered. And I've forgotten your second question because I've been rambling on.
No, you're doing fantastic. And I love about that, how much you pivot, how much you constantly reinvented yourself through your career path. And then how much you are able to leverage those skill sets in new things that you're doing, and then doing them so exceptionally well. And for everybody that is watching and listening, I just wanted to share that I met Louise actually at Clubhouse at leadership roundtables, and she came with such amazing knowledge and opportunity to really engage. And I just wanted to tell you how different it is when somebody just shows up and shares the value. And hopefully everyone that is watching and listening, you're getting a value here as well, because we wanted to attract, as Joseph is also mentioning here, thank you, Joseph, a better vibration attracts like no other. You two have it. Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you, Joseph. But I wanted to encourage everyone else to also feel free to ask questions and comments, as we are having here opportunity to hear directly for someone who has not only expertise, but who's extremely kind. And also, I just love when we do these sessions together, because it's such a richer conversation. And it's always good to hear something from a different perspective, and always great opportunity to learn from different perspective, isn't it? So with that in mind, you were definitely showing up, and from conscious mind and from consciousness, just from moments that we're seeing here during the COVID, a lot of people have a different interpretation what that means, and let alone why is this so important. So do you mind sharing a little bit of those initial value points, as well as some of the stories when you saw how conscious leadership truly make positive impacts that people can see how they can apply it?
Yeah, this is such a big topic, Izabela. And before I even get into it, I have to say that our conversations on Clubhouse, and thank you, because you are the epitome of somebody who actually engages and shows up, with their whole selves, which is just amazing. So thank you. I'm so delighted that we met in that way. So consciousness. Well, I mean, consciousness is multifaceted, isn't it? For me, I like to really simplify things because, we can get really complicated or complex, but things aren't that complicated. Things are really simple. For me, consciousness, perhaps the easiest thing to do is to share a little exercise. So consciousness is the ability to choose despite our thinking or our feelings.
Yes.
So consciousness is a practice that happens in the moment. Yes, you can prepare for it. Yes, it's like yoga, but like a practice. You get better and better at it. And just when you think you've got it, life throws you something that shows you've got a way to go. That's
so very true.
Yeah. So I always think, for me, the question is, so I always think of human development as going from in 3 stages. We start off with self-awareness. So, oh my gosh, I'm like that. I do that thing. And then we move on to self-knowledge. Oh my gosh, when this thing happens, I do that thing. Yeah, and react in that way.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then self-mastery, which is an illusion because we never quite get there, but we'll work with
Are you
self-mastery.
sure? So many
Well,
executives and leaders will tell you otherwise.
I
Come
mean,
on.
if you want to be a
Because they
lifelong
missed
learner,
your class, Louise.
if you want to be a lifelong learner, that should be an exciting statement, right? But, yeah, so self-mastery, and self-mastery is the ability to stop and actually, when it's the nanosecond between something happening and actually responding, with despite our thinking and our feelings. So
Yeah.
it's almost like, I think of it as Pavlov's dog, push button salivate. We all react. We all have buttons. We all, react in the moment. But I guess consciousness for me is that level of self-mastery where something happens, we go, oh my gosh, when this thing happens, I do that thing, except I choose something different in this moment.
Yeah.
And for me, there's one statement that always flashes in front of my eyes whenever I'm faced with something like that, and that is sort of big lettering across my sort of visual screen,
Yeah.
which is, what do I choose? What do I choose? What do I choose despite how I think or feel about this? And that's an interesting topic as well, because our thinking and our feelings can be so strong at the time. Many people get married madly in love, for a lifetime. I don't think anyone gets married unless they intended to be for a lifetime. And, and a year later, people absolutely hate their spouse and they're getting divorced. I know that's an extreme example, but,
Sure.
it happens all the time, right?
Yes.
Or we might vote for somebody as a president or head of our virtual team or anything at any level, and learn more about them as we go along and find out that perhaps they're not the person that we thought they were. Or we might meet somebody and not enjoy them at all. And, they kind of grow on us in time, and we change how we feel about things. We change our minds. So our feelings and our thoughts change over time. And I think that we shouldn't put so much faith in the strength of our thoughts and our feelings. So that question, what do I choose? What would be a better outcome for all of us right now, rather than just responding to what's going on? So for me, that is, in the simplest version, what do I choose? That's consciousness.
I love that. And I'm so glad you explained so that we can really connect the dots here. And ultimately, it's a better decision making, isn't it? And isn't it something that we're now seeing more than ever during such a huge disruption, from pandemic to economic downturns to a lot of restrictions and things we cannot do, that really put us, specifically if we're in charge of teams and people or organizations, in such a dire situation, because I keep hearing this is too much, or we don't know how to handle this, or we are doing the best we can, but are we really looking at all the aspects of it? So do you mind now sharing a little bit, how is this now happening in the real world, specifically from your point of view as an executive coach and a leadership coach that is also faculty and teaching and coaching executives to make those better decisions, to be more conscious, so that we can transform this old model that is obviously not working as effectively very well. So do you mind depicting some of that from your perspective?
Sure. And there's so many tactics we can use and methodologies we can use. There are a bunch, and they're all valid. It's really about finding something that speaks to us personally, or that when we're working with clients, that speaks to the client. And I think it's that sensitivity, that ability to actually really deeply listen for what the other needs, to help them to find their space between one thing and another. I always think of change as being the space between what was and what will be. It's pregnant with opportunity, and yet it's often the most fearful place out there, simply because we don't know. We like predictability. The way that our minds
change, yes, it's not. It's uncomfortable because it's like, I don't know what to expect, even if it's positive. People rather will not do it, right?
Yeah. And I was in a clubhouse room the other day talking about change. And somebody said that, we like change if it's something that we're driving. Change is such an interesting thing. I take the view that change is factual. So change has occurred, or it will occur, or we suspect it might occur. So there's a resistance to the reality of where we are, and there's a resistance to the reality of acceptance of where we are. So I think if we can develop a much more mutable dance with life,
Yeah.
Often I think of it, I do think of things as a sort of dance, relationships, situations. And, if you're on the dance floor and you're doing the waltz and the orchestra decides to go for a tango, you kind of work with it.
Yes.
Even if you don't do the tango particularly well or not at all, you might sit it out. But we've got to almost dance with life, I think. And, when I work with leadership teams, it's really all about helping people to know themselves really well. Because if we know ourselves well, we can ask the question, what do I choose? We can find that question in the moment. And there's no, we can learn all these theories, we can take courses, we can, do all of the stuff, read all the latest literature on what type of leader we need to be with all the fancy new labels. And there's always one, as I mentioned.
Exactly. And it's always a new year for something new to be added to it, to portfolio, right?
Yeah, all the beautiful layers and nuances. And we need to be all that. But more importantly, we need to know ourselves well. So, I often jokingly say, look, life is, we can either make this horribly serious and very heavy, or we can have a touch of humor. And for me, a touch of humor always makes it easier to work with ourselves and to develop ourselves better. And so for me, it's, know thyself and then get thyself the hell out of the way and get on with leading, So you don't want to let your own self-doubt or questioning yourself or not being in practice of being a conscious leader get in the way of what needs to be done. And, when we look at times like this, this last year is extraordinary. None of us have ever experienced anything like this. And I feel like I'm repeating what I said all of last year, as we all did. We know that, and it doesn't make it any easier. What makes anything bearable or easier to work with is that deep self-knowledge. So, knowing when it's time to step back, knowing when it's time to take time out, knowing when it's time to actually dig in and, really take a look at the shifts and the changes that we need to make within ourselves and where we're resisting. What are we resisting? So I think it's very much a personal dance. And I think we need to honor and respect each individual for that and have and really perhaps as people who are dancing, and I haven't clicked on that link, so please tell me it's clean.
and Joseph likes your dancing metaphor, so he even had a song for you here that you can dance on.
Oh, amazing! I love that.
So I love it. I love seeing a great engagement here, and also great to see Michael from the Asker. Those are the leaders in community that I'm being connected to. But it's just so wonderful to see a little bit of humor there as well. So thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it. But in terms of what you were just saying, I love how much self-awareness in different stages of our lives, different stages of our experience and maturity bring us to that more self-awareness, right? That initial stage, and then more self-actualization, and then path to mastery, path to greatness, that we can live much quality of life that it really is allowing us that no matter what is going on around us, that we're going smooth around and we're not being reactive. And we're also having here James sharing something really interesting as well, and how these situations in our lives are being affecting us. Some things that we don't necessarily have to know in advance, right? And then how do we step from these echo chambers and all these same old ways of thinking and being around the people that don't necessarily challenge us and push us forward, right? I think it's also huge. But I love that piece of conversation, obviously, around consciousness and the power of it. It's helping us also to transform. And I love that you touch change, because change to me can be so disruptive, forceful, sudden. But reality is, how do we transform with it? It's going to help how we flow, right? So I find the consciousness and transformation so going beautifully hand in hand, specifically during this current time. As you've said, during the COVID and during the last year when we were testing our bandwidth and how much we have capacity emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever. So what are your thoughts about right now? What do you see that people need the most from your perspective in order to navigate this much and healthier way than what we're seeing as evidence, fortunately?
Yeah, sometimes the best advice is the simplest advice.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of epigenetics here simply because the stuff that our mothers talk to us about, the stuff that our grandmothers talk to us about, that beautiful ancient old wisdom is so very true. And of course, the beautiful thing about science is eventually it catches up with age-old wisdom, right? When it comes to things like this. And, eating well, sleeping well, getting outside, taking in some fresh air, going for a walk, all of these things change our brain chemistry so dramatically. And and the filter of how the lens that we look at life through is altered by the words we use and all of these other factors. So there is some stuff that you can take care of that makes the impact of change so much easier to deal with than if you don't. Look, some change is just extraordinary. We've all been through really heartbreaking. I can't think of a person who hasn't had a member of their family affected. It's really deeply, it's really powerfully, it has affected all of us at a very deep level. And I'm not negating that for a moment. What I am saying is that whatever we're dealing with, if we take care of the stuff that's really simple to take care of, and it's not complicated, and it doesn't come with a shiny new, and it's not like a shiny new app sitting on the surface.
For quick fix, right? Because people
right.
think quick, but they don't realize that the transformation, the future self-development takes time and patience and consistency, right?
Yeah. And we can take all of it on board so much better if we're taking care of ourselves. So, we can talk complex stuff. We can talk all sorts of interesting systems here. We could talk about various different layers of all sorts of modalities. But I like to keep it very, very simple and very human.
I love that, please.
Yeah. Take care of yourself really well. It'll shift your brain chemistry. It'll enable you to take on board the growth and development that the path that you're on, because I think anybody listening to this would be interested in growth and development. And we're all on some sort of trajectory, and no one is better than the other, and no system is better than the other. So I'm just looking at James's comment. I love what you said, James. The line of this involves as much standing outside of ourselves, dancing around our egos, as it involves dancing inside the echo chambers of our retrofacing self-regard. It's quite poetic, actually. Thank you, James. And it just makes me think of ego as well, because ego gets a really bad rap, every now and again. Everybody's fighting their ego. And, if at any point you're fighting your ego, you're probably onto a losing battle. I think, the secret there is to make friends with our egos. And when the ego wants to protect us, because the ego builds systems to keep us safe and protect us, and you notice that same pattern is about to happen again, what do I choose steps in? And, hold the hand of your ego and say, okay, that might have worked in the past, but this time we're going to try something a little bit different. And it's only through the trying of a different action. A lot of this lies in action, Izabela. We know this, right? It's all well and good talking about this stuff, but if we're not putting it into practice, we're not creating new neural pathways. We're not creating a confidence in ourselves that is built of trying something new, one tiny step at a time.
Yes.
Adapting, finding a way that works for us, gaining the confidence to then move on to the next tiny step. So, yeah, broadly speaking, there are so many nuances to this. We could just keep going. But yeah, your thoughts on the topic?
But I love that, again, at the end of the day, we don't have to overcomplicate to make things complex. And a lot of times, the business language, the C-suite language, the overall decision processes can be very cumbersome and actually, as a result, alienate other people, right? But when we do simplify, when we really come from very different process or strategy, or even just being and doing by creating space and allowing others to participate, and just to simplify what exactly we're talking about here, what exactly we need to change, what exactly we feel, what exactly is not working, and those things become very crystal clear, and they're just so easy to pick from, and it's easy to transform into something that new stage is requiring right now. For example, we're seeing so much need people to really figure out how to be uncomfortably comfortable to deal with ambiguity or with uncertainty, right? So uncertainty is a huge factor. And when you mention ego, ego want to protect us, but also sometimes ego also defend us to the point that we're not taking any action. And that could be also very paralyzing, right? But we're also seeing other elements that for example, we're not able to connect so well with each other because of the virtualization and kind of shying away to speak up in the different forums and different platforms, or having our voice feel heard just because of lack of either confidence or whatever, speaking skills. You can go on in so many different directions. But for all of those things, I find the ones that are going with the flow, like you were mentioning, and recognizing what we need to change. As a result, they're having much more ease, much more success, and much more not only great role modeling for consciousness and transformation, but also opportunity to truly bring communities together. So do you see similar things, and what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, this is so interesting because, we talk about change and transformation, and we always just chuck those words together like, without any thought anymore, because we've been using them for so long.
Yeah.
And I've been really questioning language over, especially, I'm always questioning language, but especially over the last year. There's a little step in between change and transformation, and that is transition. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the space between, because a lot of the stuff is factual, right? As I mentioned before, change is factual. It has occurred. It will occur. We know it's going to happen. So it's that bit in between that is full of fear. And I think also fear also gets a bit of a bad rap. Fear is a pretty useful thing to have in various different circumstances. It's just when it's out of whack, out of kilter, that it shifts our brain chemistry, and then of course it's very difficult for us to think in a way that's helpful. So yeah, you mentioned something else, Izabela, which I think is really, really important. What have we got here?
James is surprising with some really great perspective again.
James is very poetic. I like James's narrative here. Oh, James, I hear you. So much change.
I'm so sorry, James, to hear about a loss of your loved ones, and
yeah.
Wow.
And beautiful hope and opportunity to connect human to human. Thank you, James. Thanks for your share.
Yes, and it's so interesting too that some people seems like, and that's exactly the point, seems like they're able to transition from different stages with ease, not because they don't care or they move too fast or whatever might be perceived, versus too slow and too connected with all themselves, whatnot, but that how they just go. And right now what I'm seeing, people are looking to figure out easy, painful, pain-free, the process. So that's reason it's even more so timely to talk about how consciousness and decision making help us out, and then how it allowed us to transform at any given time who we wanted to be and how we wanted to be, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Izabela. You mentioned something earlier, which was around the fact that something needs to give, something needs to change. And there have been many moments in my life, in my career, where I've literally been so frustrated with myself because and the words I say to myself are, you need to change. In other words, I need to change, but I just don't know what to do or how. But I so know I need to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's at those moments in time, if we learn to listen for that moment of, gosh, I need to change. This is just not working in the way that I need it to. It's just the most amazing consciousness that we can experience, because that's when, the good stuff starts. And no, it's not always pretty, and it's not always easy. And you said something about easy pain or easier pain. And I know it was a bit of a slip, but I think that's exactly what it can be, right? So yeah, choosing
what is the less painful, right? What is the lowest?
Yeah, a bit of a Freudian slip, but yeah, what is the path of least resistance? And so this thing about unpacking our lives and looking at where we need to change, if we look at the true meaning of pivot, it doesn't mean take what you've got and repurpose it, perhaps with some different language or different marketing material, or it actually means take what you've got, pull it apart, get rid of the things that don't work or don't serve you anymore, and repackage things in a novel way, a brand new way, and try it out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, come back, pull it apart again, put back a bit, take something else out, repurpose something else, put it back together in a novel way again. And, this almost goes back to the prototyping that I'm sure, have you done the marshmallow challenge with teams before? Have you ever experienced?
Yes, I did, but we also did use quite a bit of agile methodology to also figure it out, test it out, that do it a different way or whatever. But yes, please.
Yeah, so I think we've all tried it with teams in various different ways over the years, and it's hilarious, and it's a fantastic way of looking at life, because it really does teach us that preschoolers are way better at this than MBAs. So this idea of pulling things apart, getting just literally, one has to be really quite decisive about this. That brings us back to a word I mentioned earlier, or a phrase, which is the art of non-attachment, which I guess sort of stems for me, I guess one could look at the Buddhist side of things, but, I think often the amount of pain that we experience is directly related to how attached we are to something or someone being, doing, or saying what we want it to. So, and so to our levels of disappointment. So if we can perhaps step back a little, and I think it's about creating that space for ourselves where we can actually see a situation for what it is and let go of some of the unhealthy attachments that we might have to it continuing to be the same, and allow the space for it to emerge as something new. I always think of the phoenix rising, and that can't happen without without things, ceasing to be the way that they are. And it's very difficult when things are taken away from us and they force us into that position. Of course it is. It's really tough. I think we've all experienced that at some point in our lives. But what it does do is, working through one situation, it gives us this incredible, I always think of it as a backbone rather than a wishbone. It gives us that golden thread in life that if we can do this, we can do anything, really. So yeah, it doesn't mean we can circumvent pain or difficult situations. It doesn't mean we should. Absolutely not. Pain is a bit like a boomerang. It just keeps coming back at us. But really, to have a deep, deep compassion for ourselves and others is probably the foundation of all things. So yeah, working with lots and lots of different modalities and how to work with change. Agile is a brilliant lens on the world. I keep digging into Agile because it's the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. And when it comes to not only software but project management methodologies and organizational development methodologies, but I think the interesting part about Agile is probably more around emotional agility and agile thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, for me. anyway.
Yeah,
um,
but also for the others, I find the same too, because it's giving you a little that small baby step that you're afraid to take into unknown, and then little more and little more, and before you know it, you're already doing what you resisted to do. Either type of project you wanted to be on, or the situation you need to deal with, or team dynamics you are part of. So really helps you in such a small incremental ways to accumulate that change before you know it. It's like, oh my God, this is not as threatening, as challenging, as difficult as might appear a few months ago or a few weeks ago.
yeah, and if we focus on developing our emotional agility, we can cope with all of that. So
Yeah,
the system is not the issue. It's our systemic way of thinking that,
exactly.
and interestingly enough, we'd much rather buy a shiny new app or a new system or a new methodology, and some work better than others, than actually digging deep and spending the time on us. And it's tricky. It can be hard. It can be really tough, especially when there aren't any easy answers. But I think we see this in a lot of young people today, just that deep connection with values. Who am I? Where's the line I'm not prepared to cross?
Yes.
What is, so we were chatting a little earlier, and I think one of the things that I'm really curious about at the moment is, what will become of leadership? What is the future of leadership? And what are the biggest challenges of our times for the foreseeable future? And for me, that's a short period of time. It seems to get shorter and shorter. Yeah. So where's the urgency, and what do we need to focus on in terms of, and where are the biggest challenges going to be? And what are your thoughts around that, Izabela?
It's just a great question, and it really does boils down to it. Why should we pay attention? Obviously, to be better leader and better humans, right? And from right now, we're seeing the gaps in or just a general sense, the skill set wise. Right now, for example, we're seeing a huge gap in transformation aspects, willingness to move and make a decision. We're seeing a lot of uncertainty, right? But as a result of uncertainty and emotional state, that leader might be affects and impacts perversely, obviously, everybody else. But from leadership standpoint, I'm also finding a huge gap in general in the leadership core skill sets that we should not negotiate, as you were mentioning before, briefly about how important it is to have a strong ethics, to really have a strong presence and consistency who we are as on an individual level, and then how we do show up, and how do we lead with teams and organization, how do we represent the brand, as you were mentioning also, of that organization with that DNA. Is it the right type of personality or right type of brand, from that personal brand point, to be leading the teams right now? And what do we don't know, and are we willing to also say and work on things that we don't know, and let others that are experts in that to collaboratively work with us. But in terms of future leadership, I have to say I'm a little bit seeing something that makes me truly troublesome, because we already have a very limited leadership in general, in terms of not only volume, but in terms of quality, in current state in the businesses, that is already the leaders already have a huge gaps. And with new forceful changes with technology that you mentioned, and the speed and everything else, how are we going to cross over, fill those gaps when we don't even have just this fundamental stuff yet in order, let alone projection of what we need to have as a future leaders? And that to me, it's been very challenging to look at, because always boil it down to pain that people are seeing in organizations, why they choose to leave, why they cannot tolerate anymore the stress that they're having, or lack of collaboration or lack of support. So from not necessarily looking negative lens, but that is a reactive way. And I feel like how many organizations or how many leaders truly do go and focus on proactive aspects of it. As you mentioned, how important it is to work on consciousness of who we are, and then also on consciousness of who our organization it is. As a result, how do we lead and how do we show up? And I know this is a little bit of broader spectrum, and I share quite a bit here, but I really do see huge opportunity for everybody to step up and lead the way, and then also be able to consciously make a decision. I can do better, I can do more, I can step up, and I can really show how, right? And I feel like that autonomy from a lot of environments was not presented before. And I feel like old system of leaderships are crumbling with organizational structures, and new ones are developing as a result of it. And as I love what you shared earlier, how much of plethora of opportunities do we have? Now it's question now what we do with that. Are we aligning with thought leaders that are already projecting into future, that are already resembling skills and quality of leadership that we crave, that we see, that we need? Are we also paying attention what those trends are? I mean, it's just so much there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. And as ever, I'm trying to bring it down to its simplest, most digestible format, you know. And it's really interesting. I think for me, you know, I was listening to a Futures report this morning. And, you know, I guess that's a sign of the times. I find it difficult to spend too long reading things nowadays. I need to listen to everything. Yeah, COVID has affected things like that for me. But yeah, this thing around ethical leadership is way bigger than I think we realize. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if we think about what tech can do, you know, science and technology can or will do anything. You know, you know that's the reality of it. And you know, I always think of science and medicine and what have you as one, you know, great big failure after the other, because no sooner have we proved one thing than something else comes along to disprove it or find an escalation of it. Or, yeah.
Yes.
So if you know if you grew up in a household like mine where, you know, people would say, well, you can't argue with science, you know, it is what it is, it's a fact. I think we're finding our world today is full of things that are not necessarily factual. So how do we develop that filter within ourselves to know right from wrong, to do the right thing? Science always moves way faster than regulation or law or anything else around it. So if we look at the field of genomics, biosciences, if we look at technology itself, there are so many things that will be really stepping on the line of what is the right thing and what isn't, and who gets to decide that. So there's some pre-thought that we need as leaders, especially if we're dealing with exciting new products and services, or, you know, tech that relates or touches on the lives of human beings and the impact of things systemically around the world in so many different ways. So I think developing our ability to think like futurists, you know, we don't all need to become futurists, but to think like futurists and actually map out, you know, systemically, what is the impact that we know of? You know, what might be an unforeseen circumstance? What does this look like at its best? You know, where could things go horribly wrong around what we're up to? Are we prepared for it? And how agile are we as a team? How able are we to dance with what's going on, with what comes at us unexpectedly, and make the right decisions in the moment? So I think there's some baseline ethics, personal ethics and ethos, values, call it what you want, that we really need to be quite sure about. And to do that, we need to know ourselves. So we're just coming back to the same thing again and again. We keep looping back, right? So, you know, dealing with all of these various different things on top of it. And I'm sure in a year's time, we'll be talking about something else on the surface of things that will come and stay or go or, you know, disappear into oblivion. The key thing is that golden thread, you know, where is my baseline of the right thing to do? And I think it needs a lot of discussion because it's not black and white. So how do we open up that kind of dialogue with people in our organizations, with people in our communities? How do we find that true north together? Because what's right for me sitting here might not be right for somebody in North Africa or, you know, somebody in South America, or for that matter, somebody who's sitting in New York. So,
Yes.
yeah, right. So nothing is black and white. Nothing, there is no right and wrong. Well, there is quite a bit that's right and wrong, but there's plenty that is,
But
it's
it's
just
so much a vast gray area, isn't it? And then what
no,
we do with that gray
yeah,
space and how we navigate that. And then that is about how we inclusive are, how we really let all the voices to be heard, and how we allow ourselves to listen and hear different perspective and different thought process.
yeah. So more questions than answers, I'm afraid. And yes, of course, we have amazing systems, and we have fabulous programs and methodologies and tools that we work with that are really, really impactful and amazing to work with a team and use these incredible tools that we have today, which are based on neuroscience and behavioral science and exciting stuff that we can use to understand ourselves and each other better and open up that inclusion and that diversity. I think, when we understand how very human we are and how very human each member of our team is, and by extension, each member of our community, all of our stakeholders, and really understand what the impact of all of this is on each of them, only then can we bridge the gaps between us. So it does take systemic thinking. It does take the ability to actually, shift away from the nucleus of the issue, and give everything a little bit of perspective. It's just a bit like that wonderful background that you have behind you, Izabela. We do need to be able to zoom in and zoom out, and use all of these beautiful tools that are getting better and better each year. As we discover more around neuroscience and how we operate, we find better ways of helping ourselves to practice and to get better at what we do and how we think and who we are, and to work with that desire for lifelong learning that we all intrinsically have. So yeah, for me, it's about keeping it loose and keeping it open, not making anything or anyone right or wrong. This thing about polarization, and don't worry, I'm not getting political for a moment.
No, please.
I'm thinking purely of the hit of dopamine that we get when we are right and we make the other wrong. I don't know if you know Conversational Intelligence and the work by, oh gosh, her name escapes me for a moment. Brilliant piece of work around the neuroscience of how we interact between us. I'll find it and I'll post the link to the book and the author. And there's some really interesting research into how when I'm right and I make you wrong, I get this brilliant hit of dopamine, which probably means I need to find a hit of dopamine from somewhere else because it's not that healthy.
Putting other people down or trying to feed ego, whatever it is, it's destructive, and it's not, and kills the trust and kills the support. And you spot on, yes.
Yeah, so that's got to go, and we've got to find ways to bridge, to heal, to find ways of coming back together, because we've had a lot of discourse over the last number of years, and it's time to bridge those gaps. I think that this last year has, for the first time ever in our lifetimes, we've all been in the same situation. However, holding on to the belief that things divide us is kind of a little crazy, but it still reigns supreme, and we've seen plenty of it.
Yes.
But fundamentally, we're no different, and we are interconnected. So what's good for me has got to be good for the other. And I think that's the baseline.
And I love that, again, global perspective, turning around and going back full circle and thread of this conversation that we had within this last hour or so, how everything started with us, but also how we experience through us and how we put that outside ourselves through how we guide and lead and communicate and interact. It just definitely, again, comes back to owning it and our own self-sense of awareness and our own self of being able to be conscious about our own action, our own thinking, our own biases, right? And then figuring out ways and opportunities to improve them. And as you said, staying away from technology, methodologies or specific examples around that or metrics, but really just going back to human connection. all of the answers are there when we really create human connection and opportunity to learn from everybody else that are different from us, from diverse way of thinking, upbringing, whatever that might be, culture, or so many other aspects of it, right? Skill set, knowledge. We really get such a strong opportunity and sense of not only belonging but sense of community that we actually can be part of, because nobody is perfect and nobody knows it all. But if we really do the peck and allow, we can learn so much from each other. And I just wanted to say, and just this last hour listening to you, Louise, I learned so many things that, and also being reminded about them, because fundamentally, you're right, we seek the same and we're all interconnected, and showing up like the leaders is the first step to do that. And whatever might feel uncomfortable, being comfortably uncomfortable, but still being authentic, conscious, transformational, and powerful leader, as because that's the true power, in my opinion.
I couldn't have said it better, Izabela. That was beautiful. Thank you.
And for everybody that were participating, I just wanted to have a chance to have a few words in closing, because we're getting to the top of the hour here, and we had a great participation by James, Joseph, and Michael, and so many others. So just wanted to thank you for everyone that commented and participated with us during this broadcast. But I wanted to ask you, Louise, in closing, just from your perspective, anything you want to leave the audience with, something really actionable, because a lot of times we hear, we identify, but then now what? What would you suggest for them to pay attention or do or be conscious about?
I think I should have prepared something really dynamic and dramatic, but for me, it comes back to, the simple thing of that we're not islands.
Yes.
So recognizing that our feelings are valid, in the moment. I know earlier on I said, we put too much faith in our feelings, but they're valid at the time. And definitely reach out to others. There's no way to feel better than actually helping somebody else. So that's a great start.
Yes.
So with that purpose of adding value, what value can I add? How can I learn? There's sort of two key things. Often just shift our mindset from being stuck, wherever we are, which if it's not pleasant, if it's great, stay there. It's lovely, But if we're stuck, if we're stuck and we're not enjoying it, and we know we need to shake ourselves out of it, then often the first step is just stepping out of where we are and be of service to somebody else. So pick up the phone and connect with somebody else who might not be having a great time, and that in itself just shifts our brain chemistry. It shifts everything, and puts us in a better state to deal with whatever is in front of us. Because what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're best equipped to deal with whatever's going on. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make the circumstances any better, but how we experience it is everything. So that would be the very first thing. And the second is get yourself some help. Contact Izabela, or, a mentor or a coach, or have a whole sort of suite of mentors that you can call on for different things, where you can have really honest, non-judgmental conversations, and you can literally put it on the table and not be judged for it. And I think that's the greatest gift that we can give somebody else, is to actually allow them to be heard without judgment. And I only say that because it's what we appreciate the most, being able to share what's on our minds without somebody coming in and telling us how we were wrong, which goes back to that hit of dopamine. So I will leave it at that. And yeah.
And as somebody was mentioned, here is service always work. That I just want to add, that is so true. But also for everybody that is watching and listening, please go to Louise LinkedIn profile and reach out to her directly as well. She does exceptional work, and I love what she does also with Center of Leadership here as a faculty, obviously, and how you always thinking and questioning your own way of thinking, right? And what do you teach, and it's how relevant it is. And again, go back to guys' basics, figure it out on daily basis, what you can do just to move, even if it's a baby step forward. And sometimes, again, tackling those uncomfortable things are the most transformational things that can possibly happen. And making great decision, I think we could definitely go for another couple hours at least, what that takes to make a better decision and be more conscious about it. But for right now, guys, thank you so much for your participation. And we want to also thank our great guest here. And she will be back. We absolutely love her and we'll bring her back again. Okay. Louise, thank you so much for joining us from South Africa. It was an absolute pleasure. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, and thank you, Izabela. Much appreciated. I love this conversation.
Wonderful.